Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to This Week at Work, the only show to pack workplace news, practical HR solutions, and timely insights into every 30-minute episode. It's Thursday, December 19th, episode 308. Today, this is our last show in 2024, but it's jam-packed with insights you'll be mulling over at least through the new year. That's because Mikey Mack is back to project compensation trends of 2025, and we also had the latest on the Missouri Prop A suit directly from the attorney who wrote it. This show is brought to you by AIM Employers Association, live every Thursday morning, so you can regularly connect with their experts and get your legal questions addressed by Ogletree Deacons. And now, it's time for This Week at Work.
Welcome back, everyone. Happy to be here with you. We are almost done for 2024 and looking forward to 2025, where we will be bringing some format changes to the program and introducing a new segment that I think you all are going to really enjoy, and looking forward to that. That's a little bit of a teaser. My buddy Bert is not with us today. He is off on business and won't be able to be here, but he will be joining us in 2025, and I know he's out listening. So good morning, Bert, and we appreciate you always unexpectedly taking time off and putting a little bit of burden on the rest of us. So thanks for that, as always. We have two guests today. A fan favorite, Mikey Mack, is back, and we want to talk a little bit about what's happening in compensation when we are unfolding the new year, and everyone is expecting pay raises and adjustments and inflation and changes. So Mike and I are going to have a great conversation with that. But first, we're going to talk with Mark Ellinger of Ellinger and Bell. And Mark is the attorney that filed the objection to Proposition A, which we have here in Missouri, that voters, citizens of Missouri, voted on and passed for a minimum wage change and for paid sick leave. And that has been on the minds of anyone that has anything to do with compensation and or HR administration and paid time off. I know we just hosted a wonderful program here at AIM, and there were more questions than there could be answers to, and it all of a sudden is left in our hands, and it goes into effect in just a couple weeks. Mark, welcome to the program. We're very interested in what you're doing coming from Jefferson City. You're not a stranger to constitutional law. And we actually have a connection between yourself and one of our members, Christine Ellinger, over at Mohila. So it's a small world when we start putting pieces together. But welcome to This Week at Work, Mark.
Thanks, Phil. Glad to be here. Yeah, my wife's been doing HR for 30 years now. We've been married for 30 years, and she's been doing it for 30 years. I don't know how she puts up with me most days.
Yeah, well, she can put up with HR. You're probably not that difficult. And that is a tough job, but we're not going to focus on home life here. We want to understand what's going on in Jefferson City. So, Mark, maybe you could just help us start with how did we get to where we are today with with your objection being filed to the Prop A passing and it being unconstitutional. Maybe we'll start from the beginning, walk us through that.
Sure thing, Phil. So all the way back, this all starts back in January of 2023. An initiative petition to change Missouri law was filed with the Secretary of State's office. It's really got two separate subjects, and we'll probably talk about that some as we go on, but it's got the minimum wage increase, which is a very short part of the 10 pages. And then the bulk of the proposed amendment is just this sick leave requirement that's been added. That process kind of goes through the Secretary of State's office and the auditor's office to get what's called a ballot title. And then they have to go circulate and get signatures. They got hundreds of thousands of signatures. They filed those in spring of 2024. There's a deadline that it hits in May of every year, every even numbered year for the election. Those signatures were verified. The Secretary of State certified that there were enough signatures I think it was in early August. Therefore, it went on the ballot in November, and as we know, it unfortunately passed in November. The way Missouri law works is there's kind of a couple of opportunities to challenge these types of measures. You can do some pre-election challenges, and then there's some post-election challenges. What we've looked at is a post-election challenge that has multiple components to it, but the most important parts are that the voters were misled on the ballot, and then ultimately that the measure itself is unconstitutional. It's unique in Missouri. I can't speak to all states. Some other states I've been involved in, I've never seen quite the process that's done in Missouri. We actually get to file that challenge directly with the Missouri Supreme Court, as opposed to filing it in a local court and having to work its way up to the Supreme Court. So It's a little different nuance than you get in other states.
So you mentioned something that I have heard from many people, of course, trying to help them navigate, okay, what do we do now? And that is, I thought I was voting on minimum wage. I did not know that I was voting on paid sick leave and the extent of the paid sick leave.
Yeah, and that's really, a key component of our case against this measure is people didn't realize that the sick leave measure was so complete and so onerous. Minimum wage is pretty easy. I think most people kind of have an understanding. It's the dollar amount, and then there's an inflation index to it. There's certain people it doesn't apply to. I mean, it's a relatively simple thing. It's a page. This is a 10-page long proposition, and 1 page is minimum wage. The other 9 pages are the mandatory sick leave. It's got a whole enforcement structure. It exempts certain entities. And most of that was not on the ballot. Nobody had an easy way of knowing what that did. And certainly voters that voted thought it was just minimum wage. They had no idea that they were literally kind of revolutionizing sick leave in the state of Missouri.
Yeah. And I think that is, to me, that's the rub when I'm working with employers. They understand the minimum wage. It's clear and cut. And many employers, not all, but there are a lot of employers that do pay minimum wage. But many of the employers, if they're not affected, they're not concerned by that as much as they are the sick leave. The sick leave then comes with pages of regulation, of compliance that's very complex when it comes to managing that with, payroll systems that may or may not be able to track and manage sick leave the way that it is. And understanding the impact and the cost of that also appears to be something that was maybe misleading, if I can say it that way.
No, I think that's actually a really good way of saying it. I think it was misleading. The state auditor in Missouri has to come up with what's called a fiscal note, which is basically the impact upon government of the measure. And it goes out and solicits advice and opinions from various governments. They simply didn't include parts of what those expenses were going to be in their response. Now, government is exempted, ironically, from the sick leave requirement. So It only applies to private businesses. So first of all, they don't note that it only applies to private businesses. They also don't note that that's going to have a major cost on private businesses. In fact, their own materials, and that's the proponents talk about, could be as much as, hundreds of millions of dollars a year to Missouri employers. And then, if you look at what they put out there, it basically doesn't say that there's any impact to local governments, and local governments said there would be impact. So I really think that fiscal component, how much it's going to cost, what it's going to have, was completely excluded, and voters didn't know about it. And I think that probably changes people's votes if they know the impact.
Yeah, and it didn't seem like businesses had an ability to be engaged in the process and in developing, the language that would then need to be followed. When I read it, I'm like, okay. In my opinion, whoever wrote this, however it came about, missed or purposely left out some very significant language to help make it manageable, if I can say that, inside an organization.
Yeah, and I think that's the nature of, an outside group. This was mostly funded by outside the state organizations coming in with an idea and not going to, for example, the legislative process where you solicit input from all the other stakeholders.
Exactly.
Or even doing just, private roundtables with businesses to get it figured out. They decided to come up with what they wanted on the measure. Comes right out of the East Coast. There's a think tank out there that put all this together, and then they try to just stick it right on top of Missouri, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. It would be nice if on the proposition when we voted, it was clear just to that point, who brought this to the table, right? It wasn't necessarily some citizens in Missouri that were fighting for sick leave necessarily because of whatever their story or situation was. It was outside interest for whatever their reasons are, which also makes it concerning. It sounds to me a little bit like, I'll confuse things, but it's topical today, TikTok being owned by the Chinese and infiltrating our country with that. And now having, outside interest implicating our Constitution in Missouri versus Missouri citizens and their interest in our lawmakers.
Yeah, I mean, originally the whole concept of doing an initiative petition was the grassroots. People would see a local problem, they couldn't get it fixed in one way or another, and they would, come together as a coalition and get something done. Clearly, Proposition A was not done that way. I mean, this was put together outside the state. The entities, while they have Missouri names, I mean, Missouri Jobs for Justice is the name of the entity, is almost entirely funded by out-of-state interests.
Well, who couldn't be in favor of Missouri Jobs for Justice?
They have to gather signatures. It costs millions of dollars. Those millions of dollars didn't come from, average person in Missouri giving 50 cents or a dollar in a kitty. It came from huge 6-7 figure contributions from outside the state.
Okay. All right, Mark. So now what would we expect, right? So I'm getting phone calls, and when I say that, I'm getting hundreds of phone calls from employers about, should we change our pay structures effective January 1? Should we be anticipating and investing in our systems and policy changes to be prepared for May? Is there an expected timeline that you can share with us? Any insight?
Yeah, sure. So when we file the suit, because the way the law works in Missouri, it comes fairly short notice before the effective date, at least of the minimum wage, which is January 1. We asked the court to expedite. The court will expedite the case. They just will not get us an answer by January 1. That means the minimum wage probably goes into effect on January 1. The real key, and I think what most employers are telling us, is the sick leave component's the real difficult component. That doesn't go into effect until May 1. And as a result, we're going to move to expedite the case to get an answer well in advance of May 1. Because employers need to know either they're going to have to create the systems or they're not going to have to create the systems. And while I guess it's easy enough not to create, there is a lot of timeline in creating the systems. So, I would anticipate that this case gets submitted to the Supreme Court. Probably, my guess is probably early February.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
with the decision probably coming out either late February or very early March. And there's no appeal from the Missouri Supreme Court. So whatever their answer is will be the final answer. The kind of nice thing about the litigation going directly to the Supreme Court is it's quick and you get a result. If the court finds that the entire measure is invalid, then none of it applies. And I realize that doesn't help with the minimum wage because people will have already potentially gotten more pay, but it wouldn't go forward. If they find, they may find that the minimum wage goes forward and the sick leave doesn't go forward in case there's no sick leave. They may find that we have to have a new election, in which case sometime in the next 2 years, we would have another election on this. Or, the final option is they could find that it's okay and it goes into effect. We're optimistic that the court will see these problems and throw it out, but we won't know what they say until, like I said, probably late February, maybe early March.
So I do get this question, and maybe you have some insight or don't. How is this different than what happened in Illinois just a couple years ago with their paid sick leave? Is it in the way that it was constructed and brought forth by legislation versus proposition and constitutional change? What's the fundamental difference, if any?
Well, I mean, I think it's the process is really the fundamental difference. I can't speak to how the Illinois sick leave works. But when you go through the legislative process, you're talking to not just businesses, you're talking to the people who are going to regulate it. What's the best way to write it to do the regulation? What's the impact? What's the timeline to reasonably implement it? Things like that are all through the legislative process. When you go the initiative route with Proposition A in this case, you skip all of that. You just put your plan in, and if voters approve it, then everybody's stuck with it and has to figure out how to operate under it. And that's not a really good recipe to fix it. Now, this is a statute. It's not a constitutional amendment. I think that's real important. The
Okay.
legislature does have the authority to go in and amend this.
Okay.
But that takes its own set of time, and bills, if they're passed, unless they have a specific thing called an emergency clause that makes them go into effect much earlier, they don't go into effect until August 28th, after the session's over. So if it goes through regular legislative session and they have to fix it, the odds are that fix doesn't occur until August 28th of 2025, which is well after everything goes into effect.
Yeah, everything's sorted by then, for
Yeah.
sure. All right, Mark, anything else that you can think of that might be of interest to our listeners?
No, I would just say, you can watch the Missouri Supreme Court dockets. That case is all very public. You'll see all the pleadings and the briefings. And when the oral arguments occur, they're not just, people are invited to attend the oral arguments in Jeff City, but they also stream them online, so you can listen to them if you choose to do so.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, we appreciate you taking some time and joining us in our program. Thank you very much. I'll be watching and listening with lots of interest as we want to find our way through this with as little impact as possible. Again, thank you very much. It's nice chatting with you today, Mark.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me on, and Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to everyone.
Yep, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, Mikey Mack, welcome back.
Hey,
Yeah.
good morning. Good morning. Yes,
Hey, your New York just came out. Hey, how you doing?
yeah, how you doing? How you doing? Yep, doing good. Actually, excited about moving into our 10th year working with at AIM and with all the members, and also want to just make a quick comment of a thank you to everyone that we've enjoyed our relationship, and we look forward to the continuation of that.
Yeah, well, how much we appreciate, and I can just tell you on behalf of our members, Mike, and you work with many of them year in and year out, and every year it seems to be a growing number of members. We appreciate you and Astron, and I see some presents over your right shoulder there. I don't know if are those getting ready to come in the mail this way, or Santa probably at your place?
No, we this is my last day in the office in New York, so there's a few presents for me, and also I have a birthday coming up January 2nd. So I have combination gifts that I have to take home this afternoon.
New Year's baby. All right. Well, we got a lot of things to talk about. We got about 10 minutes to get that done. Mike, I think what the burning question for people is what are we seeing with the average? I always like starting with this. Where's the average pay increase? And maybe talk about equity and adjustments with us as always. And what are you seeing for around the country?
Yeah, I think the trend right now, and it really started with the new Social Security adjustment. We always talk about the impact of that. And, for a number of years, it's been very high. A few years ago was 8%. But this year it's going to be 2.5%. So now we're talking about a more modest, I'd say, kind of back into the norm that we had seen for a number of years. So that kind of sets the trend going forward. So right now, from a budget standpoint, what we've been tracking and hearing is around between 3 and 3.5% in terms of average pay adjustments going forward in 2025. And whether that's merit or across the board or some combination. However, we're also still hearing that clients are concerned that there may be an uptick in the unemployment or the lack of employees as the economy starts getting stronger. And so many of the members that I've spoken to recently, they're putting in an additional 2% in their budgets, kind of as a place to just save some money, just in case they have to make special adjustments. So when you look at that, you're really talking about a total still of around 5%.
Yeah, when 5% increase to overall payroll,
correct,
and less than that, around that 3% is
correct.
What I'm hearing you say for real merit cost of living adjustments. And then we have our equity adjustments as we're still really creating alignment, which constantly I always am when we're working with employers, that alignment, we're in a line one day, we're out of alignment the next day.
Correct.
And that happens because of compression and, the open market, when we go and bring people in from the outside into, an existing pay structure, and that creates pressures that we don't always
Correct.
have until we get into a hiring season.
Correct. The other thing to keep in mind is that even though a lot of people with the election are thinking, well, we're going to see a return to less regulations, and therefore we take a breath now. Although if you kind of track what happened with the nominee for the Department of Labor, one kind of questions, are we really going to have less regulation? However, the other thing we're tracking now are how the states are picking up the slack, because there are, at least in 20 different states across the country, legislation to follow, like Illinois and New York and California, in terms of pay transparency. And so as that becomes more in vogue, you're going to start finding pay equity issues as you start doing your analysis within pay transparency, and that is going to be an additional cost. And so a lot of clients around the country in different areas are kind of looking at that saying, well, we better be prepared, because once we have pay transparency, it will lead to pay equity issues. And those pay equity issues will cost money to fix.
And what I find interesting about that is there's a balance in pay equity that sometimes isn't always looked at equally. And here's what I mean by that. Pay equity in some people's mind, like there's a differential in my mind of a range of equity.
Right.
And it's funny because a lot of people, and when I work with them or I hear their complaints coming through HR, pay equity means just that. It's the same. They believe I make the same amount, not in a range of equality. And that's interpretive, right? That there's no general rule, or is there a general rule of what equity is?
Yeah, that definitely is what we're hearing. And so there's an education, of course, that has to occur around that, understanding that our only obligation is to be sure that everyone has the same equitable opportunity for pay, meaning that we have a range. We're not setting ranges different because you're older or you're female or the like. So everyone has that same potential in terms of their earnings. The real problem comes in is that what are the rules of engagement around that? Are we basing it on seniority? Are we basing it on performance? And is it being consistently applied? And that's where we get back to our managers and supervisors, because a lot of pay equity issues come from the fact that supervisors and managers make their own decisions, and they're not following those rules that we've established. And therefore, we then create inequitable pay situations.
Yeah, and because it's what management and HR and advisors like yourself who say, and then what employees receive. We're like, hey, we think we got it, and then we deliver this message, and people are still upset because it's not the same, or the range is not tight enough in some cases. Mike, let's talk a little bit about what you predict for unemployment and its impact on wages. So when we're looking into the crystal ball 2025, we're not going to see inflationary adjustments to the interest rate down as frequently, is what I think the Fed has told us. What's your crystal ball telling you?
Well, what we're concerned about is that the good news, if the economy continues to grow and gets stronger, and we are going to be starting to maybe take more control of things like we had in the past, like energy, right? And things like that, that's going to create a whole new segment. If you remember 4 years ago or so back, when we were leading in the world on energy production, we already had a problem of the unemployment rate. Actually, employment was very high. It's just there was nobody else to work. because they were all going to North Dakota or to northern Pennsylvania, so they
And we
could
had
get
pop-up
jobs.
towns, all kinds of things
Oh, yeah.
happening.
Yeah. And if that comes back, and that could very well come back, then we're already going to have a strain on the population in terms of, where are the new workers going to come from if they start going into that industry segment, other industry segments are going to lose.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start finding it being tighter and tighter. So once again,
And that's a very high paying industry segment.
Yeah, you can't compete. You can't compete.
Right.
So retention now becomes the number one issue. Again, it hasn't changed. So regardless of the unemployment rate, regardless of inflation, it's still going to come down to how are we retaining the talent we have, because we may not be able to replace them going forward. And I'm hearing more and more people asking about how can we build into our pay system at least some kind of a process that allows us to retain, especially our stars, our better talent, because we can't afford to lose them because there's no replacement.
Now you're making my head spin, Mike, because if I'm going to retain some people over other people who I consider to be stars and top talent and pay them more, am I going to have a pay equity problem?
Well, as long as you're using the right rules of engagement and are not right. It all goes back to, what are those decisions? So if we pay on competency, for example, very easy to make a distinction between two people on their competency, and even more than performance, I think skills that we need, and that if you have the skill and the experience necessary and we can demonstrate that, then we're okay. That's all part of pay equity. But again, we have to have all those rules in place and be sure everybody understands it, and also be sure our managers are following those rules as we go forward.
Yeah, I know. I'm aligned with your thinking on this one, and I like having people on the program. I'm aligned with their thinking. Every week, I got to have Bert, and his thinking and mine were very seldom aligned. He's always coming from left field somewhere. But I do believe if I heard President-elect Trump drill, baby, drill, and we start to see an increase in our energy production, it doesn't take much draw from the existing working population to create, again, what I think is going to be the Great Resignation 2.0. And I think we may see that in the latter part of 2025, because there's another factor that I think is as relevant as any other factor, and that is I've been in this job now 3-4 years, and that starts to track the beginning of the last Great Resignation. And, the person's like, well, I'm ready to try something different, even if I'm not overly unhappy, but I'm ready to try something different. The time in job, I've stayed long enough not to look like a job hopper, and I'm ready to go. And that compounded with an extra drain starts a cycle on very thin ice already.
And with a strong economy, there's going to be opportunities, right? I can sit there and I can say, well, why am I still here? Right. I have all these different opportunities, and I'll go. And I don't think we're going to see the end of ghosting, where we make offers and people don't show up.
Oh, no, that still goes on. Yeah.
That will continue on. And Phil, you have always talked about really looking at population trends in general, right? Because we are.
You can't fix that one.
Yeah, we can't fix that. And we're in the beginning of that downward plunge of not having as many people anyway. So if the economy becomes stronger, then obviously, where are we going to get the workers to fill those positions? And so that will continue. And that's why I think the 3.5%, but then added another 2 or 2.5% on top of it, you're going to have that money, because you're going to have to make some special adjustments along the year.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, I know you have a meeting with one of our wonderful members down in Florida, so I'm going to let you jump offline and get to that. Thank you for joining us. Merry Christmas, Mike. We appreciate all that you do for us. Happy New Year and happy birthday.
You got it. And thank you all very much for a great 2024. Look forward to 2025. Thank you.
Us too. Yeah, bye-bye. All right, well, that wraps up our program and the conclusion of 2024. Producer Nick? Great job this year. Appreciate all that you do for us, and you and Feature Group and the team there always do a fantastic job in bringing our message to our listening audience, and very much appreciate that. The work that goes on behind the scenes makes it easy for Bert and I, and it's definitely appreciated. So thank you very much to you and Tim Sater, who is our Vice President of Marketing that works really close with Nick to make all this happen. We're very grateful for the team of This Week at Work. Thank you very much. All right. We will be back here next year on Thursday, the first Thursday of next year at 7:30 Central Time. We'll see you then. Until then, go out and have a great holiday season. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues, forward our invites, share the link, aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere you are. Don't forget you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.